Are oral leases enforceable in Florida? What landlords and tenants need to know. In Florida's fast-moving rental market, agreements are sometimes made quickly and informally. A handshake, a verbal promise. A tenant moves in with the understanding that we'll sort out the paperwork later. But when disputes arise, those verbal arrangements can become legally complicated. As rental demand remains steady across Pinellas County and much of the state, both landlords and tenants are asking the same question: are oral leases enforceable in Florida? The answer is yes, but only in limited circumstances. And the details matter. Florida law and the one-year rule. Under Florida law, an oral lease can be legally binding if the rental term is for less than 1 year. This principle stems from the state's statute of frauds, which requires certain contracts, including leases longer than 1 year, to be in writing to be enforceable. In practical terms, a verbal month-to-month rental agreement can be valid. A 6-month oral lease can also be enforceable. A 2-year oral lease is not legally enforceable because it exceeds 1 year and must be written. If no duration is specified, Florida law generally treats the arrangement as a tenancy based on how rent is paid. Monthly rent typically creates a month-to-month tenancy. Weekly payments may establish a week-to-week tenancy. This distinction becomes critical when either party wants to terminate the agreement. What makes an oral lease difficult to prove? The primary issue with oral leases is not necessarily legality, it is proof. Without a written contract, disputes often hinge on conflicting accounts. What was the agreed rent? Were utilities included? Was there a pet deposit? How long was the tenant supposed to stay? In a formal written lease, these terms are documented. In a verbal arrangement, they must be reconstructed through evidence such as text messages or emails, bank transfer records, witness testimony, payment history. Florida courts can and do enforce oral agreements, but the burden of proof can be significant. When terms are unclear, judges may rely on statutory defaults rather than personal recollection. For landlords in competitive markets like Clearwater, St. Petersburg, and Largo, relying on memory rather than documentation can quickly become risky. Termination rules still apply. Even when a lease is verbal, Florida's notice requirements still govern termination. For example, month-to-month tenancies generally require at least 15 days written notice before the end of a rental period. Week-to-week tenancies require shorter notice periods. An oral agreement does not eliminate statutory notice obligations. In fact, many eviction cases in Pinellas County stem from misunderstandings about notice timing rather than non-payment alone. If a landlord attempts to remove a tenant without following formal procedures, even under a verbal lease, the court may side with the tenant. Security deposits and verbal agreements. Security deposits under oral leases are subject to the same Florida statutes as written leases. Landlords must comply with requirements regarding deposit handling and return timelines. The absence of a written lease does not eliminate these obligations. However, disputes over deductions are more common when there is no written condition report or move-in documentation. In coastal markets where humidity and wear can be substantial, disagreements about property condition are frequent. Without written terms, resolution becomes more difficult. The Pinellas County rental market context. Pinellas County continues to experience steady rental demand, particularly in areas near the beaches and downtown St. Petersburg. With limited inventory and rising insurance costs affecting property owners, rental terms have become more structured in recent years. Most professional property managers in the region now use detailed written agreements, even for short-term tenancies. Oral leases are more common in private, informal arrangements between individual landlords and tenants who know each other personally. While that approach may feel simpler at the outset, it often introduces uncertainty if circumstances change. Risks for both sides. For landlords, oral leases create exposure in areas such as rent increase disputes, maintenance responsibility disagreements, lease duration misunderstandings, eviction complications. For tenants, the risks include sudden termination if notice requirements are misunderstood, unclear promises about repairs or improvements, disputes over deposits or prepaid rent. In a state where landlord-tenant litigation is common, documentation provides clarity that verbal promises cannot. Why written leases remain the standard. Although Florida recognizes certain oral leases, real estate professionals overwhelmingly recommend written agreements for any residential rental arrangement. A written lease provides defined rental terms, clear notice requirements, documented repair obligations, detailed deposit provisions, reduced evidentiary disputes. In today's regulatory environment, particularly in high-demand counties like Pinellas, formal documentation protects both parties and reduces the likelihood of costly misunderstandings. The bottom line: yes, oral leases can be enforceable in Florida, but only for rental terms shorter than 1 year. Even then, enforceability does not equal simplicity. Without written documentation, proving the terms of an agreement becomes far more challenging. As rental markets remain competitive and legal compliance grows increasingly important, written leases are not merely advisable. They are essential for clarity and protection. For homeowners converting properties to rentals, investors managing multiple units, and tenants seeking housing stability, the lesson is consistent. Clarity in writing prevents conflict later.